Arsym the Bard Part 4 Flame. The sun hung high above everyone's head, pouring on a refreshing warmth that complemented the revelry felt by all who stood under Thad's embrace. The 40-foot tall statue loomed over the town, gifting prosperity to all the citizens of Elkswood. Elene raised her arms high above her head, soaking in the sunlight, and then turned, smiling brightly at Arsym. I do understand the seriousness of the situation. You saved me, so the least I could do is save your girlfriend. He felt a bit of heat rise to his cheeks. Thank you, Elene. They looked down at the orc who perhaps went too deep into his cup. He did say something about red mead, which may have a connection to this Red Mead's tavern he was to meet the captors of his best friend Lilin at. Dalphonil Manor sat upon the great hill overlooking much of the township and was a safe bet to many mysteries that now stood out about the town. The mayor spoke of some atrocity centered around it, a cursed child supposedly linked to the note signed the Wolf of the Elm. Arsym looked over to Elene, who was now squatting over Blink and passing a small ball between her hands. It wasn't that he didn't believe that her father, the circus master, couldn't help. It was more so that with every passing second he felt as if his connection to Lilin faded. She had been there for him countless times, his only true beacon of light in a village that treated him as an outcast. Cassandra, his mother, loved him unconditionally, but the more he dwelled on the secrets hidden around this Quran, responsible for these atrocious acts, the more he couldn't help but think her of maybe a facade. His village had been put to the sword, some rounded up for an unknown fate, but for the most part it seemed that their fate too would be a bloody end. He gripped his head as everything flooded back to him. The horrible memories rippled through his being. He found himself brought back to the present as a hand clamped his shoulder. Look, Elene said, pointing to the manor overlooking the town. Billows of black smoke raised into the air, darkening the warming sunlight. Lilin! Arsym had said, charging recklessly towards the manor. He wasn't sure how, but he could feel her warmth in the air around him, and a crushing feeling bearing down on his chest. His body felt numb as he poured every last ounce of strength into his legs. It took them less than 10 minutes to reach the gate leading up to the manor. A large chain wrapped around it, and a padlock bigger than his head forbid entrance. Using the dagger from his belt, he tried to finesse the lock. Elene came panting behind him. I didn't know you could move like that. She put her hands to her waist and took a few swallows of air. You know that's not how you open a lock, right? She gave a gentle push to move him to the side and removed 2 long, thin slivers of metal. Lock this big probably be pretty easy. Arsym, now stepping back, looked up to the air shimmering from the heat of the large home in front of them. It was palpable. Even from 60 yards they must have been from it. The sound of a very frantic lute strumming filled the air, and the statue of Thad was glowing a goldish red. He could make out the townspeople gathering around it. An audible click broke his observations, and Elene stood up holding 2 broken bits of metal. Well, if that won't work. She placed her hands an inch from the large lock, and Arsym noticed the steel turn a brilliant orange, then a shade of yellow, and finally a brilliant white color that saw it turn molten and slosh to the ground around her feet, creating a hissing noise and a few flashes of fire as it burned the stone pathway. The chain fell away with it, and she backed away with a bow. Elene the Great, thank you, thank you! A group of leather-clad men and women bearing the town symbol rushed beside them. A large woman with arms thicker than Arsym's legs gave a well-executed round kick to the front gate. Out of the way! We'll take care of this! 7 people had run through and were carrying some kind of large tank along with a long leather sleeve. They set it down and 3 of them placed their hands on the tank, while one attached the large leather sleeve. A blue aura surrounded each of their hands and water began spraying in an unbelievable amount. Arsym and Elene stood a moment watching the blazing building. The light was almost blinding in the intensity of the flame. By the goddess, who's that? Elene said, pointing to the upper window of the manor. The silhouette of a man with broad shoulders stood, the flames licking behind them. The shattering of a glass pane, along with the ensuing explosion of air meeting flame, saw the burning figure raining 15 feet to the ground. A woman from the crew ran over and dragged him away from the building. Arsym saw the familiar sight of a lesser healing magic. He walked over. Listen, I can help. I know some healing magics as well. The responder was deep in concentration. A bead of sweat gave hint to her powers already coming to exhaustion. Arsym went to her and looked to make a quick triage as his mother had taught him. He immediately realized that this man below him wasn't breathing. Casting an analytical spell, he surmised that this wasn't actually a living creature at all, but a very lifelike doll. Listen, this isn't. Looking up, he realized the responder was now staring him dead in the eyes. Took you long enough, kid. A wolfish smile crossed her face. Elene had run behind him at this point, her blade drawn. Too bad about your friend, really. Arsym felt tears and a flush of anger building in him. Where is she? Where is Lilith? The woman's smile went to an over-exaggerated frown. Why, right in there, actually. Didn't expect her to go kablooey. She began to laugh. Arsym reached out to grab the woman, but his hands passed through her as if there were only air in front of him. Her form gave way to smoke, and she drifted off into the air, joining into the billowing clouds of ash that choked out the sun. He slammed his arms down into the homunculus, letting out a ferocious scream. Arsym, we can't do anything for her. We need to get back. The fire, it's spreading. Elene was pulling on his shoulder. He jerked away only to find himself being pulled again, the hot tears now streaming down his face. He let out wails of sorrow, staring back to the hellish inferno where his friend was no more. Blink bit into his trousers and was pulling along with Elene. The two of them managed to bring Arsym back beyond the front gate, where she raised a hand and grass vines rose, wrapping tightly around his legs. I won't let you kill yourself, she said, grasping both of his shoulders and pressing her head into his. She could still be in there. She needs me. She needs me. His face was a mess of tears, snot, and dirt. The best thing we can do right now is let the village fire patrol do their work. We have to trust them. Arsym continued to thrash and wail until he felt another warm glow surround him as Elene embraced him. Her voice took on a melody. Sleep, my little kitten, my star shining bright. Sleep, child, away from the restless night. For today brought pain, but tomorrow may see a light shining bright and misery. Waves of exhaustion enervated him, and he felt the little fight he had left drain away as he faded into Elene's warm embrace. Now then. Elene gently laid him against the fencing and rested the vines wrapping around his legs. She wiped her hand across her own face, which wept in compassion and remembrance. Reaching down, she produced a small whistle from one of her pouches and blew hard onto it. A long-eared yellow goblin-like creature appeared in a puff of smoke. He was dressed in a well-kept black suit and had a bright red bow tie that complemented it perfectly. Ah, Miss Elene, do you require me? The creature said, making a long sweeping bow. I do indeed, Nautric, and I don't want to hear I told you so, okay? Nautric the hobgoblin smiled up to her. Well, you did say you were done with me and my services. Elene scowled. Now isn't the time, all right? Just help me take him back home, okay? He made a short bow again before walking over and taking the unconscious boy's hand. Just as suddenly as Nautric had appeared, he vanished, taking Arsym with him. Blink barked, seeing his companion was now gone. Be calm, Blink. We'll join them soon. She turned to start back towards the town, only to be confronted by four robed figures with animal masks concealing their face. A very old cackling was coming from the smallest one standing in the center. I'm afraid we'll need you to come with us, girl. Elene slipped a knife from her bracer into her hand and threw it forward, only to see it connect with the ground, a good foot from her intended target. She rarely missed, ever. Her world started spinning. Loosing another blade into her hand, she felt a strong hand gripping into her wrist. How had the large one been able to move so quickly? She stared into the dark slots carved into the bear mask, and only now did it register that these four were well out of her league, and the terror set in. Her limbs began to ache, and it felt as if she were going to throw up. I wouldn't bother trying to resist further. You belong to the den now. Blink phased and bit into the hand grasping her. It hung there a moment as the giant's grip failed to loosen. Its eyes went from a strong black color to a milky white before it fell to the ground, yapping and twitching. She wanted to help, but it was hopeless. Her body was giving up on her. She buckled to her knees, and the last thing she could remember was being hoisted onto his massive shoulders, the world now spinning much too quickly for her to do anything but close her eyes and wish it stopped. Arsym's dreams were filled with images of Lilin staring across the fire. She smiled over and held up one of the sticks, gifting him a large salmon she had managed to snag. She had always been so much better at everything, it seemed. He took it and bit into it, allowing its tender flesh to ease the overwhelming hunger he felt. A smile crossed his face as he looked back to her. Her features were soft, and a single tear had escaped her eye, turning a goldish color before dispersing on the ground. "I don't regret any of it," she said. Arsym looked on in horror as she started to fragment and break away into bouts of golden dust that was carried off with the wind. "No, Lilin, please, stay!" She smiled one last time before fading into the ether. The fire began to dim, its ember now barely burning. He was huddled, crying softly in front of it. "You really should remember to feed that." A voice broke the deafening silence. The tinder flashed as a kindling was added to the fire. "Elene?" She sat beside him, smiling while biting into a large fish. He pulled himself into a sitting position, and no sooner did a small white dog appear on his lap and curl up comfortably. "And blink." "Thank you," he said, wiping away some of his tears. "For what?" Elene said, glancing over. "Being here when I needed you." A shock of cold water spritzing onto his face woke him. He stared up into the face of a well-dressed yellow long-eared goblin. "Ah, young man, the little miss asked me to bring you to our little home. I suspect that we should at least endeavor to freshen you up before she arrives." Arsym looked around to see that he was on a hay bed, well presented with fine white linens and silks. It was extremely comfortable. The goblin held out a hand mirror, showing him his face, covered in dirt and dried snot. "You aren't exactly presentable as is, I'm afraid." He snapped his fingers and a bucket of water fell to the ground beside him. With a wave of a hand, a blue aura surrounded it, filling with water to the rim. He pulled a rag from a nearby stand, dipped it into the water, and handed it to him. Arsym began wiping away the muck on his face. His thoughts were plagued with images of Lilin, Elene, and Blink. He knew in his heart that Lilin was gone, but he needed to prove it for himself, and if nothing else, to see to her passing rites before he would know any peace. Death wasn't unfamiliar to him, but the death of a friend, especially one that is loved, weighs heavier than any burden. "How can I get to the Dalphonil matter from here?" Naltrick looked back at the boy. "I'm afraid I'd like you to wait for the mist to return. I can't imagine she will be longer than another hour or so." Despite his protests, he indeed found himself stuck for another hour before a large tabaxi entered the room, his fur completely black, wearing a set of plate armor and shouldering a massive battle axe. He had a large scar running the length of his face, extending from his left ear to his right jawline. Another figure entered the room, a tabaxi woman dressed in revealing fine silks that danced in the air as she moved. "My daughter has not returned. I would speak with the boy, Naltrick." Arsym found himself unable to take his eyes off of the woman. She was so beautiful, elegant. "Awesome, was it?" she said, looking in his direction and offering a small smile. He couldn't help but wonder how she had known his name. "I know many things," she said, offering another smile and flashing a hand to a glowing piece of bone hanging from her necklace. It was embedded with a turquoise orb that pulsated slowly. "My daughter Elene is still out there. I was hoping maybe you knew if there was something else she intended before returning." Arsym looked down. "No, ma'am. I'm unsure. I venture she would be somewhere near the manor, maybe to investigate for me." The mother placed a paw under her chin. "Perhaps. Wilhelm, lead 3 others to see to this." The large plate-mailed cat raised a heavy hand and gave a thumbs up before sauntering out. "May I look as well?" Arsym said. "But of course, follow Wilhelm." Arsym made a bow and quickly followed after the massive Wilhelm. He didn't pay much attention to him as he passed out of the room. "We were in a tent this entire time?" He looked in awe, seeing the many dazzling tents all around the field they had stepped into. He surmised they must have been magically enchanted, for each was hundreds of times more spacious than they initially appeared. There were people everywhere and colorful performers dancing about, greeting and directing. The air hung thick with food and the shouts of vendors shouting their wares. He was so caught up for a moment that he almost lost Wilhelm. They eventually came to the entrance of a gray-colored tent, which seemed a bit of an eyesore to the beautiful colors surrounding the rest of them. Wilhelm looked back and held up a hand to Arsym as he followed him inside. It was clear he wasn't allowed entrance. A moment later, three more Tabaxi warriors emerged, each dressed for battle. The first was Calico with a pair of scimitars glinting by his sides. The second, a black cat, with a large shield that appeared much too big for its thin frame. And the third, a gray color with a simple-looking staff. They began meowing at one another, while sneaking glances at him. Wilhelm turned to him and pointed forward. He started walking in that direction and the rest of them followed behind. "I'm not really sure where I'm going," he said, glancing back at the pack. Wilhelm raised a hand and jerked a thumbs up forcibly at him. "Okay, then." It wasn't long before they made it to the somewhat familiar town, however, and soon he found himself jogging forward towards the mansion. The flames had been put out, but it now stood in quite the sorry state. A few people were standing at its gates, looking into the grounds and chatting about events of the past. "Part of the curse, I swear it," a familiar orc was saying. A small fox woman made a snarl at him. "Yeah, right, Oryx. You're always spinning tales." He raised his arms up. "I'm not, swear it." The woman sighed and appeared to be ignoring him. They walked up to them. "Pardon me, have you seen a snow-colored tabaxi and a small dog by chance?" The orc looked over at him. "Absolutely. They went inside the manor, they did." The fox woman snarled at him again. "Please don't listen to Oryx. He's a liar and a scoundrel to boot." Wilhelm was already halfway to the mansion by the time Arsym noticed he had been left behind. "Guess it doesn't matter." He jogged behind the four tabaxi who boldly walked to the front door of the burnt structure. Wilhelm unslung his axe and buried it deep into the compromised oak. It shattered, and bits of lumber fell in front of them as the frame was broken out of the wall. As they entered, a piece of the second floor had started loose and fell directly above Arsym. A towering shield lifted above his head, and a frail-looking tabaxi shouldered it with a practiced sweep. It gave him an unregistered look before turning back to follow the rest of them. They proceeded behind the one with the two scimitars, who was now holding a scrap of cloth to his face and sniffing about. Many of the paintings adorning the walls were burnt beyond recognition, relics of a wealthy individual that had once traveled these halls. There was only one that appeared untouched, at the very end of the hall. They stopped in front of it, and the cloth dropped from the leader's hand. He began pawing it and sniffing about the large painting. The image was that of a finely dressed tabaxi woman, a small babe in hand held close to her chest. After a moment, the staff-carrying tabaxi stepped forward and began mumbling something. The air shimmered in front of them, the painting phasing in and out of the vision. A staircase leading down to darkness revealed itself. The shield wielder took the lead and readied it for any surprise attack they might find. A worthy endeavor, as a large ball of flame struck in front of them and dissipated around it as if it were even absorbed somehow. The shield glowed a purplish color as arcane sigils began lighting up around it. Wilhelm turned to Arsym and scowled. What? I didn't do that." His gauntlet pointed down, and Arsym saw that his foot had pressed on a small design carved into the stone. It was barely visible to him. "Fine, I'm sorry, all right?" Wilhelm pointed two splayed fingers to his eyes and then to the ground, and they continued their advance. They eventually came to a very well-kept, lavish-looking entrance room. The walls were adorned with the tapestry of a wolf displayed in fine velvet material. Chandeliers illuminated the second their feet touched the marble flooring. It was clear that this room hadn't been touched by the fire. The entryway led to a heavy iron-reinforced oaken door. Wilhelm continued towards it and placed the bulk of his brawn into forcing it open. It was clear that this was no small feat of effort as the door creaked and buckled under his efforts. This room was much the same in its decoration, save a corner where a skeleton blackened beyond recognition was mummified, remnants of iron melted into the marble flooring. He tried running over, but was yanked back forcefully as Wilhelm threw him behind. No sooner had the large cloaked figure in a bear mask revealed himself from one of the pillars in the back of the room. Each of them felt an overwhelming oppressive aura about them. Arsym found the compulsion to run unbearable, until Wilhelm let out a deep guttural hiss that all but diffused the anxiety each of them had begun to feel. "We weren't exactly expecting the extra company, young Arsym. Seems I'll have to bloody my hands again. Forgive me, dear mother. In the blink of an eye, the man appeared in front of Wilhelm and was locked up with a long black blade bearing down against his battle axe. He didn't even have time to register the hit, it happened so fast. The scimitar tabaxi was flourishing its blades and made a strike for the bear of a man. It had appeared to make contact, but the form fell away, leaving only a cloak. A brilliant flash glowed behind them, and two pieces of furniture in the room vanished, leaving in their place a woman in a fox mask and the bear masked man. Each now were revealed in their leathers, the bear man holding a two-handed blade of shadow, and the woman brandishing two daggers, one a bright white, the other a pale red. Looks like I've been found out, the woman said, followed by a chuckle. She took in a large breath and breathed out a green cloud that quickly started filling the room. She looked over to Arsym. Hope you brought your mask. Wilhelm made a charge for the bear mask while the scimitars glinted in the direction of the woman. She threw a dagger towards the spellcaster tabaxi, but her blade was absorbed by the large shield. It shot from behind the woman inches from her head and landed on the floor in front of her. A shield guardian, huh? And a wielding a displacement enchantment. No matter. You'll all be dead soon enough. The smoke was well up to his chest now, and he knew breathing it in meant his end. He felt so useless as the battle ensued. They were just so quick. Things took a turn for the worse as the guardian shield-bearer buckled to his knee and began coughing erratically before collapsing. The woman began laughing maniacally. Did I mention my little poison enters into wounds as well? Arsym frantically began searching his mind. When had he been hurt? The lumber that fell? Guess that little burn was all it took, huh, Arsym? He felt pain grip his chest. She was right. It was all his fault. A dagger flew through the smoke, climbing ever higher and stuck into the caster's neck as his hands glowed a faint orange, hovering over the shield's body. He quickly collapsed into a neat pile along with him. His eyes began to burn, the cloud inching ever closer to his face. He saw that the scimitar-wielding warrior was hanging limp on the end of a shadow-like spike protruding from the ground in front of the foxwoman. She had begun running her hands through the blood and smearing it over the exposed bits of her own flesh, cooing to herself as she did so. Wilhelm was locked with the bear, seemingly at a standstill. He seemed to have the better footing and finally pushed the axe blade to his opponent's throat. The axe blade dug deeper still until it appeared to have gone through the man's body, but no blood was seen. It fell into the smoke in front of Wilhelm, who raised his axe above his head as if to strike the body. He stopped as the bear appeared behind him from the gas and crushed his arms and throat together in a neat package. Wilhelm released a guttural war cry but couldn't manage to break the hold. It was clear his strength had peaked. The axe slipped from his hands, and Wilhelm struggled to no avail. He was caught. Surrender yourself, Arsym. It is as the dead mother would have it. The foxwoman cackled. We'll give your tabaxi fling back. Elene, was it? Pretty sick of you to trade your girlfriend the second she's in peril. I can't promise anything about that delicious little dog of yours, though. Arsym felt his chest tightening all the more. The gas had begun clearing, but the air was more suffocating than ever. You have Elene? He couldn't lose another friend, especially not now, especially after... His eyes trailed over to the sad shape of the burnt skeleton in the corner of the room. Its shackles melted deep into the marble surrounding it. If you accept, we'll have you kill this one here, the foxwoman said, with a pale dagger pointed at the large tabaxi warrior. Arsym is faced with a decision unbeknownst to him. Elene and Blink are held in the clutches of a far stronger enemy than he could have anticipated. What should he do? Option 1. Accept the terms and kill Wilhelm, the plated tabaxi warrior. Option 2. Feign acceptance and try something to free Wilhelm. Maybe they could still win this. Option 3. Run! Let's write a story. Let's play a game. Without the dice.